welcome back to the DTVC Extra podcast. As always, this is Matt here. And yeah, in this episode, we're going to start our look at the Die Hard franchise. We'll be looking at Die Hard, Die Hard 2, and Die Hard with a Vengeance in this episode. And then in 2 weeks, we'll come back and we'll look at the other two. Is it Live Free or Die Harder and a Good Day to Die Hard? Is that what those ones were called? So I saw the fourth one. I haven't seen the fifth one yet. So, when I'm looking for these movies, I think that this, especially with these franchise ones, I'm looking for ones that, at least for the most part, are available on one of the streaming sites I already pay for. And so I noticed that these ones were all on Paramount. And I thought, okay, that's perfect, because I'd been watching, Strange New Worlds on Paramount. So that's actually a fun series if you're a Star Trek fan and you haven't seen. My friend Mike Palos, who listens to the show here, and who we're hoping to have on as guest with our other friend Mike Petrowski next month. But he was telling me, he's like, you got to check out Strange New Worlds, and so I started watching it. It has been a lot of fun. So I'm on Paramount as it is, and I see the Die Hards on there. I'm like, okay, that's perfect. I can do that. Then of course, right when I go to watch them, they're gone. It's that classic streaming shell game that happens there, and but fortunately they're on Hulu. It is a 20th Century Fox franchise, so they should all be on Hulu. So it was good to be able to see them there. And as far as I know, all 5 should be available. I've watched the first 3 there, so I'm hoping the other 2 will be available on there for the next 2 weeks. But if not, I'll have to rent them. So that's not the worst thing in the world. But for now, we've got them all here. I was able to watch the first 3 movies, so that's what we're going to start with. We'll start with the first movie here, and with this first one, we've talked about this one so many times. I mean, Die Hard comes up all the time. I've reviewed it on the site for a special one. I think, everybody, it's a fan favorite. It's one that people are always discussing. So I'm trying to think about what I could talk about with Die Hard that hasn't been covered before. What are some areas of the movie that people haven't talked about before? And I mean, the first thing, I think, this isn't brought up, this does get brought up some, but I sometimes wonder if it's not brought up enough. Just what it meant that it was Bruce Willis helming an action franchise. And so maybe that's where a good place to start is to kind of go back to the beginning where in the mid-'80s, right, Bruce Willis gets Moonlighting. And that show was hugely successful. I mean, it won a lot of Emmys. It was very popular. One of the things about that show that I didn't know until I was reading up on this is that ABC was making that show in-house. So at that time, and I don't know if the rules are the same, but at that time, broadcast channels, so like ABC, NBC, CBS, they could only do so many shows in-house due to FCC regulations. Otherwise, they had to get them from production companies or other places. Like so, for example, probably the most common one, the one that you've probably seen a lot, would be like Warner Casey. Warner Casey, I believe, is a production company responsible for like The Cosby Show, Roseanne. The Warner and Warner Casey, Tom Warner, he co-owns the Boston Red Sox. So that shows you how much money he gets. And of course, how much money he's still getting every time one of those shows is aired on a cable network or in rerun syndication on a local channel. So there's a lot of money there with that. And so for ABC to be doing Moonlighting in-house, they didn't have to spend as much money per episode. At least that's what they thought. Because they weren't paying, a production company, they weren't paying someone like Warner out of pocket for the episode. So they gave the creator much more license to kind of do what he wanted. And of course, that's when he starts getting crazy. He would use expensive shooting techniques that were, kind of antiquated and didn't involve modern techniques because he wanted the show to have an older feel to it. There was a black and white episode. Instead of shooting in color and reverting the film to black and white, he just filmed with black and white film, which was expensive to get. And episodes would take a lot longer to do. So back then, I think a weekly 1-hour show would be they'd expect the episode between 7 to 9 days, and his were 13 to 14, sometimes even longer. Sometimes reruns would just show up for no reason. 1 week, you do a couple new episodes, and then suddenly there's a rerun mid-season because he just couldn't deliver the episodes on time. But the show was a huge success, and it made a huge star out of Bruce Willis. And then Sybil Shepherd, she was, obviously she was in Taxi Driver. She was a star at that time, but she'd had some misses before that. So this revitalizes her career. And, now that Bruce Willis is a star, he does a couple Blake Edwards movies, but he's known for being this sort of comedic leading guy, this romantic comedy leading guy. He's very charismatic. Everybody loves him. Everybody has fun with him. But action wasn't really, where people were expecting him to go. That wasn't what was planned for him. So at the same time, while Bruce Willis is making this huge career, the novel and movie adaptation, The Detective, right? It was I think '68 was when the movie came out. So it was the same year as Rosemary's Baby, I believe, and it was the movie that led to the breakup of Mia Farrow and Frank Sinatra's marriage, right? Because Frank Sinatra had the rights to the detective. He was making the film adaptation of the detective, and he wanted Mia Farrow in that movie. And then here comes Robert Evans with Rosemary's Baby, and she's like, "I'd rather do that." And he's like, "Well, if you do this movie, then we're gonna get a divorce." And I think he sent a courier to tell her she was divorced. And then, of course, when Rosemary's Baby killed the detective in the theater, I think she had Robert Evans put out this huge ad in the L.A. Times, or one of those maybe an entertainment paper, something like that, saying like how much better Rosemary's Baby did in the box office compared to the other movies at that time, including The Detective. But anyway, Sinatra still had the rights to the book series, and so the sequel to that book, the one that they were using for Die Hard, it would eventually become Die Hard. When they were looking to make a movie out of it, they had to go to him first to see if he wanted to refuse it. So he was like 71 at the time, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't have any interest in doing that." I mean, the character in the book is older because he's going out to LA to meet his daughter. His daughter is Holly Gennaro, so that's where the name Holly Gennaro comes from in the movie. He's going to see his daughter who works at Nakatomi Plaza as opposed to his wife. So he's an older person as it is. You know, he's the same character from that 68 book, The Detective. So that's part of the idea. So even though it's an older character, Sinatra was too old for it. So another person they had in mind was Clint Eastwood, because he had expressed some interest, and he wanted to direct himself in the movie. But he was making the Deadpool at the time, so it wasn't going to work for him. So at that point, they looked at a couple different action stars. They had Arnold Schwarzenegger, Stallone, kind of the classic ones, the usual ones. And of course, Joel Silver's involved, and of course, so he's especially worked with Schwarzenegger. So they were thinking about it with them. I can't remember if they had other projects going on, or if it was kind of like a consideration, but let's not do it. I know John McTiernan, who ends up directing the movie, he was deciding to go, he had the idea of going with somebody who wasn't a normal action star for the part. But the thing is, at that time, there was this sense that you could either be an action star or a dramatic or romantic comedy lead. You couldn't really switch. Like that was the understanding, that there weren't many people that could do multiple things, right? There aren't a lot of Jack Lemmons who do like comedic things and dramatic things. So the idea that someone like a Richard Gere, who was offered the part, would say yes to it was kind of unfathomable at that time. You wouldn't think that, as Richard Gere, you wouldn't want to do an action movie and put yourself out there like that. Harrison Ford, I think at that time, what was it? Presumed Innocent, right? That's the one that the Apple TV show is based off the film. He was trying to break out a little bit from the action adventure mold because, obviously Star Wars and Indiana Jones, he wanted to kind of prove that he couldn't do, he didn't have to just do these kinds of movies. So he had turned it down. A lot of dramatic actors that were offered the parts, kind of, leading men that we would think of, turned it down. So then it kind of fell to Bruce Willis, who at that time didn't really have a movie career. I mean, he'd done a couple Blake Edwards movies while doing Moonlighting, but he didn't really have a big career at that point. So for him, it was like, why not? Let's take it. Let's see what happens. But I mean, even with him, right, the early posters, they couldn't use his face on the posters because when they were showing trailers for the film, people were laughing, expecting a comedy, because that's who Bruce Willis was at that time. So the idea that this would be a serious action film. Now, when they saw the movie and word of mouth got out that, like, no, this is a legit action film and Bruce Willis is fantastic in it, then they could add his face, right, to the picture next to Nakatomi Plaza. That's kind of the poster that we see today, but they didn't do that. So, I mean, the film's enduring legacy is sort of three pieces like that. I mean, the big one, of course, that we always think of, especially the direct-to-video connoisseur, is the legacy of the Die Hard INA. And I think when we get into the next couple movies, the Die Hard INA really starts to take hold in the movie industry. I was trying to think of what actors have done Die Hard INA movies. Dolph, right? Dolph did the Detention, right? Detention is Die Hard in a school. He did Command Performance, Die Hard in a Russian pop concert. Van Damme, right? Sudden Death, Die Hard in a arena, right, during a hockey game, Die Hard in a hockey game. Seagal, right, Die Hard on a ship, Die Hard in a train. Van Damme also did Die Hard in a train. And Don the Dragon Wilson, right, Die Hard in a missile silo in Blood Fist 6. Die Hard in Hoover Dam, right, in, what was that, Terminal Rush, right, the one with Roddy Piper. I mean, right, PM with Anna Nicole Smith, they do Die Hard in a skyscraper, which is what Die Hard is, So there's so many Die Hard in it. So that's the one thing, right? Of course, is that it creates its own subgenre of action films. That's probably its biggest legacy amongst us as action fans. But the two other pieces, I think, of the legacy there that's huge, I think, for me. I think one is the fact that with Bruce Willis being cast and being successful, the movie industry looked at it and said, we can cast anybody to be an action star. It doesn't have to be either a big muscle-bound guy like a Schwarzenegger or a Stallone, or like an extreme martial artist like a Seagal or a Van Damme. We can just cast, somebody who's a comedic lead or comedic dramatic lead, or a dramedy, that what moonlighting was called back then. That kind of, a lead who's for the most part is doing the will they or won't they kind of thing with Sybil Shepherd. We could bring him in and he could work. So that's one piece of it, right? And of course that ends up becoming a bigger thing. I mean, the other thing is at the same time, a year later, Tim Burton casts Michael Keaton as Batman. So at the same time that you're doing it for action stars, there's also a sense too that with these comic book adaptation leads or other properties, right? Not just comic books at that time, because comic books wouldn't have just been its own thing like it is now, where comic books on their own are such a big thing to be adapted. But back then, comic books were kind of lumped in with video game adaptations, cartoon adaptations, all kinds of different things that were being adapted to the screen. Old TV shows, right? But for any of the ones that had an action adventure bent to it, for actors, they saw that as like, okay, that's something that could build my career the way it did for Michael Keaton. But on the action side, it was the same thing, right? Now you get someone like a Richard Gere who originally is like, no, I'm not doing Die Hard, who's now doing something like The Jackal or something, that kind of thing. So that was one piece of it, is that the studios looked at it and said, yeah, we could cast anybody. And eventually, right, that leads to Matt Damon in Bourne Identity. It leads to Liam Neeson in the Taken films. It gets a little bit out of hand, but that's kind of the idea. But the other piece of it is that from an actor's standpoint, it used to be as an actor, and there's a quote that I always like from Michael J. White where he says, when you kick someone in the face, you get known for kicking someone in the face. And what he's saying, right, is that when you get pigeonholed into being an action star, you can't do dramatic stuff. Now, in his case, he's been able to branch out a little bit because he does have, especially as a comedic actor, he's fantastic. But even as a dramatic actor, he's really good. So he's tried to branch out a little bit more, but it's hard, right? It's hard for him to get those parts. But at the time when Bruce Willis was taking this role, there was a sense that it didn't go in either direction, right? So you couldn't be a mainstream actor who would then go into genre action pictures and then come back out unscathed, right? Or the fact that even these genre action pictures could build your career, make your career even bigger. So that was part of it, is that, a Richard Gere now could say, oh, maybe I could do an action movie. It's not going to kill my career. It's not going to prevent me from getting the other roles that I want down the road, which is what the fear was for those action leads. Now, again, it doesn't go in the other direction, right? If you start out as an action star, it's really hard to make your way into more dramatic pictures, other kind of leading man pictures. But at least for this, they were a sign that you could go in that direction. And that was huge because the way actors started mapping out their careers from that point on changed. I mean, that's where you get someone like a Jake Gyllenhaal who's like, I got to do, what was the one he did? Was it 2012 or was that one John Cusack? I mean, Cusack, same thing. I mean, a lot of these actors, Nicolas Cage, they all started doing action movies with the idea that they could come back. And, but the action figure was gonna pay them the tens of millions of dollars that would allow them to do the independent films that they've always wanted to do. So it completely changed that setup there. And so I think those pieces of how those three things that Die Hard did to change the film industry, I think are huge. And we're still seeing it now, right? We're still seeing, I mean, obviously Michael, we can't leave out Michael Keaton's Batman because that falls right on the heels of this and does kind of the same thing for comic book movies. And so now it's like this thing where, Robert Downey Jr. is like, okay, well, I got my Oscar with Oppenheimer. I'm going to come back to doing comic book movies. Comic book movies were what got me back on track as an actor, right? I mean, everybody talks about that when they did Iron Man, that the studio didn't want them to cast Robert Downey Jr. He was kind of considered a liability at that time, and then he rehabilitates his career through Iron Man. Again, that's the kind of thing that you would back when Bruce Willis was doing a Die Hard, right? A Robert Downey Jr. would be kind of sunk at that point. There wouldn't be a sense that like, oh, well, if he did genre pictures, that he could somehow rebuild his career. I mean, the other piece is that genre has become more mainstream now too, right? Those are the movies that make the $1 billion in the theater. It's not, the genre pictures are the ones that really sell. So that's another area for it. But like with Michael Keaton, thinking about the fact that like someone like a Christopher Reeve would have to play a superhero, someone who's like 6'4", kind of a big, imposing kind of fellow. that Michael Keaton could play Batman, that changed it. So now it's like, oh, now Val Kilmer can do it. Now George Clooney can do it. The same way that when Bruce Willis does this movie, that you can say, like, okay, now Keanu Reeves can be an action star. Now, and then when he doesn't want to do the sequel to Speed, Jason Patrick can do it. Again, Matt Damon with The Bourne Identity, because then we get those edit techniques for martial arts where now we can not only just have Matt Damon be an action hero, but we can make it seem like he's really great at martial arts, right? Because that's one thing that you don't get with Bruce Willis, his character. The techniques for filming martial arts at that time were not to the point that they are now with those kind of quick those quick edits there that could make it look like he's doing all these things that he's not really doing. At that time they couldn't do that, so that add an extra level to it, right, with Matt Damon. But it's still kind of based off that logic from what happened with Bruce Willis. So there's those pieces there, I think, that are important to point out. One of the things I should say before I get into kind of what I like and maybe some of the qualms I have with the film is I'm not going to do a standard synopsis like I usually do, because I feel like everybody knows what Die Hard is. Everybody knows what it's about. Everybody knows what happens there. So I'm not going to get into that, but. This is, I don't know if this is my favorite action movie, but it's right up there. I mean, Commando's due for a rewatch. I got to say that. I think the last time I saw it was when I reviewed it on the site for I don't know what number hundredth review it was, like 500, something like that. It was one of the hundreds, one of the milestone posts I did Commando. I don't think I've seen it since then, so it's definitely due for a rewatch, because that one's up there for me as my favorite action movie. But this is right there. This is, if it's not better than Commando, it's like right behind it or top three. I was trying to think of some other ones that I really love. Rambo's. I haven't watched the Rambo's in a while either, but I've always had those in my head as being really far up there. And I can't think of anything that's come out in the last 15 to 20 years that's better than Die Hard for me, for sure. I mean, I think of something like Captain America: Winter Soldier, which was a really fantastic action movie, but I wouldn't put it above Die Hard. And so I'm trying to think of what is it about Die Hard that works? Like, why is this movie so good, and why do I see it as such a classic? And also, how it spawned this whole Die Hard in a phenomena. And I think the big things, obviously Bruce Willis as a hero is fantastic, right? I mean, he's the wisecracking piece. One of the interesting things I read about the wisecracking piece is that when he was talking to LAPD cops, for the role, to get a better sense of, to do his research for the role, he found that they all had a dark sense of humor. So he adapted that dark sense of humor, because it's the idea of, you're dealing with really horrible things on a daily basis, and sometimes you just got to make light of it just for your own sanity. And so he brings that to the role in a way that it's so endearing for the crowd, right? As an audience member, you just love this piece. So that's one piece right there that really works. Obviously, the Alan Rickman, Hans Gruber baddie, that's just hits it out of the park. And that's another one where he had just moved to LA as a theatrical actor, and he was given the part, he was offered the part, and he didn't want to take it. He was like, I don't want to be pigeonholed as a baddie. And his agents were like, no, you got to take it. This is a big deal. This is a lot of money. It's a big movie. You should do it. And of course, he hits that part out of the park. He's kind of this sort of, I want to say he's like this archetype of a baddie, right? Of the sort of the Euro trash baddie, which so many of these diehard innas do later, right? They do an Alan Rickman style baddie. So you get that part that's really fantastic. You've got these supporting characters that are a lot of fun. Reginald Vell Johnson as the cop who's helping him out, who's on the CB with him. He's really fun. Argyle, right? As the limo driver. He's a lot of fun. Even like the heel cops, right? Like the principal from Breakfast Club, right? Who's kind of the deputy chief, who's a pain in the ass. Johnson and Johnson, right? They're Ellis, right? Hart Bochner, who we just talked about in a previous episode. We were looking at Supergirl, right? Hart Bochner as the your standard like insufferable yuppie person that just nobody wants to be around. He plays that part so well. Look at that watch. It's a Rolex, baby. It's so when he comes into the room, right? When he's essentially selling out McClane to get, to essentially in his mind thinking that he's going to get everybody freed by selling out McClane. When he walks into the room, he's like, Hans, booby, and it's just like, I say to myself, these guys know what they're doing, and he does that. It's like, it's so over the top, but it's so much fun. So there's those elements there, right, that all kind of come together that, any action movie can do right. I think that's one of the things, is that any action can have these kind of characters and have them do it right. They don't all do it right. Oftentimes these characters aren't fleshed out properly. I found out the reason why these characters were fleshed out properly, why this part of this actually worked so well, was that Bruce Willis was still shooting Moonlighting at the time, but also Sybil Shepherd was having twins, and so she wasn't able to shoot as much for the show. So they were making up for the fact that she wasn't in as many episodes to film more with Bruce Willis. So he was having these very hectic shooting days where he was doing Moonlighting during the day, Die Hard at night. So John McTiernan, he goes to the creator of Moonlighting, was making these elaborate, over-the-top episodes, and he says to him, like, well, what can we do here? We got it's a little bit too onerous on Bruce. And McTiernan decides, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to flesh out these supporting characters a little bit more to kind of give Bruce a break so he doesn't have to spend as much time shooting with us. What that does is, one, these characters get more life to them. They become more three-dimensional, which makes them more fun, they add more to the film. So I think that's one piece that you get. So you get more flavor that way. But the other piece is that they have John McClane's character in the movie enough, right? But spaced out in certain parts so that you never lose him, right? They do it in such a way that we never lose him for too long. But also that, when he's gone, we can't wait for him to come back, right? He's such a great character. We can't wait for him to come back. But we are also enjoying these other scenes with the other characters. So that's a piece of this movie that you don't really get in a lot of action movies. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Like for example, you look at Vin Diesel with the Fast and Furious films. Well, he wants to make himself the best three-dimensional character. So then we lose, for example, Tyrese. Think about Tyrese's Roman character, who is very three-dimensional and is a really great character in the second movie, especially his chemistry with Paul Walker. He becomes, over successive movies, just sort of this goofy guy who yells when his car's parachuting out of a plane and that kind of thing. He's kind of more, he's more like comic relief, And so that's kind of what happens when you have this huge ego of a Vin Diesel. Everybody else has to be kind of supporting, and they kind of trickle down, like their ability to do stuff, and they start to become less three-dimensional, more one-dimensional. Well, in this movie, right, because everybody's in this for the first time, you don't get that, right? You get more authentic growth of the characters, which I really liked. The other thing I think I've always liked, but I really kind of focused on a little bit more watching it this time, is from a story standpoint, the way that you've got this long, 2-hour film, and I mean, the first half hour or so, you don't really get a lot of action, but we get the sense right from the beginning that John McClane is a guy who lives his life 15 minutes at a time, right? Kind of stealing again from Vin Diesel, right? I live my life a quarter mile at a time. But his entire life is spent where he never thinks more than 15 minutes ahead. His whole life is predicated on, I just got to get through the next 15 minutes. To the point that, his wife, his estranged wife, Bonnie Bedelia, who's living out in California, Holly Gennaro, she doesn't even know if he gets on the plane to go out to see them, because that was up in the air. Whether or not he'd get on that plane, it was, up until when it was time to board, he was going to get on the plane. And then when he gets there, right, Argyle picks him up, the limo driver, and he's like, yeah, I don't know what's going to happen. He's like, okay, well, I'll wait for you in the garage. So even then, he's not like, okay, I'm going to make this decision that I'm going to stay here with my wife and make this work. He's still thinking about it, right? It's like everything is that way. So then when the shit hits the fan and he becomes the fly in the ointment, as he calls himself, which, of course, that's a term that whenever we have a diehard inna, right, we've got our diehard inna with the fly in the ointment. When he becomes the fly in the ointment, right, that's what makes him so difficult for the baddies to handle, because everything he's doing is he's just managing his way through the next 15 minutes. So as he's making his way through the building and he's fighting with the baddies, everything he's doing, it's like, okay, I've got a machine gun now. Now the machine gun's going to be used to shoot. Okay, now I've got to escape the baddies. Now I'm going to use the machine gun as an anchor to pull my, to kind of lower myself. Oh, the machine gun's falling off. I'm going to catch this thing and kind of climb up here, figure out what I'm going to do here for the next 15 minutes. And I mean, from a writing technique, to be able to sort of think it out like that this character is going to only live every 15 minutes, but yet have this overarching story that you're going to work, because the writer can't write that way, or the writer has to map out all these 15-minute increments, right? The way that plays out for me, I think it's really fantastic. It's something you don't always see. And I mean, again, action movies try to pull these things off. They try to do this, but this one is so successful in making it work and again, Bruce Willis is part of it. Bruce Willis, he sells you on this idea of this guy who lives by the seat of his pants like this, that his entire life, again, is just a series of 15-minute increments of what am I going to do now? So I always really appreciate that part. An interesting thing about this that I never would have thought I liked, but when I watched the second movie, which we'll talk about this piece when we get to the second movie, it's the idea that everybody is who they say they are, right? Yes, the terrorists have a secret plot in mind, right? We don't know, the fact that they're terrorists, we don't know what they're after, and then we find out that, yes, they're after trying to get money from the vault. But even that we kind of know, because they're trying to open a vault. We know from the very beginning that they've got Clarence Gilliard down there trying to open a vault. So we know that they're trying to steal something, but there's never a point where, like for example, like Johnson and Johnson, the FBI agents, there's not a point where, like, they land on the top of the skyscraper and they're like, oh, guess what, we're in on it, we were paid off. And that's like this cheap kind of hacky plot twist thing that so many action movies do, right? That, oh, this guy, the whole movie, we think he's been helping out the hero. Nope, turns out he's not. He's a baddie too. Oh, what do you know? Oh, this woman that's been hanging out the whole time. Oh, she seems so great. Oh, no, turns out she was a baddie. They don't do anything cheap like that from a story standpoint. And I think that's another good point. I think that's another thing that I appreciated about this. So there's that there. And the one-liners, so many great one-liners in this. I mean, Clarence Gilliard, the thing I love about Clarence Gilliard is he wants to play a computer nerd, so he makes his character as computer nerdy as possible. And he's like, oh, quarterback is toast, stuff like. I mean, I love that. But I mean, that quarterback is toast line is great. I mean, when that big tank thing is pulling up and they start firing with rocket launchers, and Rickman's like, hit it again, and Willis is McClane's on the walkie-talkie. He's like, okay, you made your point, hon. You made your point. Pull back. Let him pull back. I'll take it under advisement. Hit him again, and it's just, it's so beautiful. I mean, those are the kind of things that have become sort of metaphors. I mean, like a sports metaphor standpoint is like when one team is beating another team and they don't let up, like they just keep winning, and it's like, it's kind of the same idea as like Hans, I'll take it under advisement, throw it again, throw it in the end zone again or something like that. Obviously the Yippee-Ki-Yay is a great one. I don't know. I mean, all that kind of stuff. I think just the characters in this and the way that the story unfolds, it all just works organically. It all. I was trying to think. Like everybody talks about this movie as a classic, but why is it a classic? And I guess for me, like, why is it a classic? And I feel like these are kind of the main points. These are the things that really worked for me. Now there are some things that didn't work for me. Obviously, the feet getting cut. Right. I'm a bit of a squeamish person. I mean, recently my wife got bit by one of our cats, and I was starting to get faint. I mean, part of it was I probably hadn't eaten enough that day either, but she was like, oh, the bite went all the way through, and I was like, oh, geez, I don't know if I can handle this. And she ended up being okay. But I was, if she ever really hurt herself, I'd be in trouble probably with how faint I get around blood stuff. But actually, the pulling the glass out of the foot and stuff, that didn't bother me too much. What bothered me, and I think this is a problem with action movies in general, the lack of glass continuity, right? So it's like, oh, they shoot out the windows so the glass, cuts his feet. But then later, when he is swinging from the fire extinguisher or the fire hose, and he swings through and he crashes through that glass, and then the wheel that the fire hose was wrapped around, when that falls and it's threatening to pull him with it, suddenly he's being dragged through this glass that he just smashed through, but his back is perfectly fine. It's not like completely all shredded up and everything like his feet were. For me, I think from action movie standpoint, I mean, recently, with Freddie Young of Full Moon Reviews, we talked about Punisher Warzone, and I don't think I brought this up in Punisher Warzone when we were talking about it, but same thing when they create Jigsaw, and he's getting kind of like run through this like glass crusher at the recycling bin, and it shreds his face and everything. I feel like glass should never be used as something that cuts people in an action movie, because there are just too many circumstances where you don't want glass to cut people, where people go smashing through windows, where glass is all over the place and it's not cutting anything. You got to have glass continuity. That's my feeling. And so it's like, if you're going to say that the glass cuts him on his feet, you can't then later say it doesn't cut him when he's being dragged through it with his bare back with just like a tank top on. So that's one qualm I've always had with this movie. And I think just action movies in general should just all say, you know what, glass doesn't cut people in our universe. That's it. Glass cannot cut people. We because you need it too many times to not cut people. It has to be toy, whatever, candy glass or whatever it is that they use. It doesn't hurt when people get smashed through it. But again, that's a minor. Should I say a minor quibble? I don't know. It's a minor issue that I have with the movie that overall I really enjoyed. So there's that piece there. I guess the last piece is the idea of whether or not this is a Christmas movie. And I think I've always had this sort of this middle of the road feeling about it, that it's like, hey, if it's a Christmas movie to you, then it's a Christmas movie. If it's not a Christmas movie to you, then fine, it's not a Christmas movie. And I know Bruce Willis has said he doesn't think it's a Christmas movie. He thinks it's a summer blockbuster, which that doesn't make any sense. You can't have a summer blockbuster to take place at Christmas, and it's a Christmas movie. I mean, yes, obviously, ideally, you'd rather have the Christmas movie take place during the Christmas time, but also if it's a Christmas movie that's an action movie, the summer might be better for it, right? No, of course, now we do Christmas in July all the time, so why not? But so that's one piece. Now the director says, no, this is definitely a Christmas movie. I intended it to be a Christmas movie. That's what it is. And the reason why I agree with him now, and I say for sure we need to be calling this a Christmas movie, is the beginning of the film when Bruce Willis is in Argyle's car and Argyle is playing Christmas in Hollis, right? The Run DMC song. That at that time, that movie, that song, it was like there was this sense of like, well, you can't call that a Christmas song. It's a rap. Rap isn't a Christmas. Hip hop isn't Christmas music. You can't, right? There were a lot of people that were like, no, that's not what Christmas music is. It's not hip hop. And of course, now we fully believe that that's a Christmas song. And I feel like John McTiernan was using that song in that moment as a metaphor for the film. Like, hey, people are saying this isn't a Christmas song, it's a Christmas song. People are going to say this isn't a Christmas movie, it's a Christmas movie. I know Bill Simmons, who does the Ringer podcast, he's adamant this is not a Christmas movie. And I think part of his reasoning is that there's this idea that Christmas movies are filled with like wonder and merriment, right? And, people getting wishes for things that they hadn't planned on getting, and, the believing in Santa and all that kind of stuff. And, this, nice snow on the ground and all the decorations and everything and all this kind of fun wonderment stuff. And this movie takes a different tack on Christmas, right? These are adults. When adults do Christmas, they do Christmas parties. They get drunk and have sex in offices, and there's, the major piece of Christmas is the commerce aspect, the money, the spending. We don't want to believe that. We want to believe that it's getting together with your family. It's taking time off from work if you're lucky enough to be able to take time off from work. I know a lot of my life I had jobs that I couldn't take off Christmas. And so now that I have a job that does let me, and not only let me take off Christmas, but I can take off the day before, the day after, and kind of make a mini holiday out of it. I don't take that for granted. I definitely appreciate that. But there's a privilege in that, right? Not everybody can take the day off for Christmas. But it's that idea, right, that you're supposed to, sort of spend time with your family. But really, it's, businesses in America, especially retail businesses, they run in the red until Christmas time. That's why they push Black Friday so it's earlier now. Right now, Black Friday deals start now in the middle of October. That kind of crap. And this movie really, I think, it does a good job of encapsulating the money grubbing side of Christmas, right? Whether it's people wanting to get presents, people selling things, buying things, all of that kind of stuff. And so it's another part of Christmas. We don't want to believe that that's Christmas, right? We want to believe that Christmas is wonder and merriment and Hallmark movies and all that kind of thing. But this does a good job of giving you a different side of it, which I really appreciate. So there's that as well. But I think after seeing this again, and that moment where we get Christmas in Hollis from Run DMC, that's, for me, seals that this is a Christmas movie. It's just not the Christmas movie that you think it is. Just like, if you're someone who doesn't think it's a Christmas movie, it's just not your idea of a Christmas movie, doesn't mean it's not a Christmas movie. Just like saying that Christmas in Hollis isn't a Christmas song, just because it's not your idea of a Christmas song doesn't mean it's not a Christmas song. And, of course, now we fully embrace that. I mean, I remember when that song came out, there's no radio station near me. Of course, in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Kittery, Maine, or wherever, all the radio stations were in Portsmouth, I guess, or maybe some in Boston, but nobody was playing Christmas at Hollis for a Christmas song. And maybe like in New York, right, maybe in New York for some of those radio stations, but definitely not where I grew up. Now, like, that's in rotation. That's part of the Christmas music rotation, along with something like Last Christmas by Wham, or obviously the Mariah Carey one that gets played all the time. I mean, I remember that wasn't even out yet when this movie was made. That didn't even exist. So I think that metaphor for me really drives home that this is a Christmas film. So, again, I used to be on the. I used to not have a side. I mean, yes, it's always been a Christmas movie to me. I should say that it's always been a Christmas movie to me. But I've never argued with people who said it's not a Christmas movie. But I think now I do argue now, because I think that Hollis Queens, or the Christmas in Hollis Queens, that inclusion is to me means that the director was intentional about making this a Christmas movie, and as such, it is. And so, fortunately, I mean, the Christmas miracle is that John McClane is able to pull this whole thing off. That's the Christmas miracle, is that he's able to defeat all of these baddies the way he's able to do it. The Christmas miracle is, even though I was giving it a hard time for the glass part of it, and I guess that's me. Oh, Matt, you're perfectly fine with John McClane wrapping a fire hose around himself, jumping off a skyscraper and smashing through the window and coming out on the other side. You're good with that, but it's the dragging through the glass, that not getting cut, that bothered you. Yes, it did bother me because it wasn't consistent with the previous part of the movie. But anyway, I mean, that's a Christmas miracle. These are Christmas miracle things that happen in this film. So I guess that's the other part of it. It is a very miraculous movie. So that's another. It's in that part of the Christmas spirit as well. So yeah, I was trying to think if I had anything else. I don't have much else to talk about with this one. I think probably when I get into part two, there are going to be things we'll pull back from part one as well. But again, this is a classic. This is one of my all-time favorite action movies. It's up there. It's one of my favorite Christmas movies. It's my second favorite Christmas movie behind a movie that I watched for the site called Make the Yuletide Gay. So you can find my review on the site for that one. Really fun romantic comedy where, with romantic comedies, there's always like this sticking thing that keeps the couple getting together. Well, in this movie, what it is, they're a young gay couple going to college. The one of the couple, he hasn't told his parents yet that he's gay, so he's still in the closet. And then the other one, his parents, the mom is actually played by Gates McFadden. They go on a cruise and leave him by himself for Christmas. So he just surprises his significant other at his home in Minnesota while he's staying with his parents. And suddenly they have to kind of work out the having a relationship while the point of tension is the not telling the parents yet. And I thought that was a really great idea for a romantic comedy. Usually the point of tension is that the woman who shows up in her old hometown in British Columbia, who is now a fashion designer. She's got some jerky husband, and now she wants to marry this new hunky guy with with his flannel shirts that was went to high school with her, but she can't because she's already married, right? So how's she going to dump that old husband? None of that happens in this. So anyway, that's my favorite Christmas movie, Make the Yuletide Gay. And again, you can find my review of that on my site. But Die Hard is right there. Die Hard is probably number 2 for me as a Christmas movie. And again, one of my favorite actors. I think this Commando. You can't go wrong with Die Hard on a night. There's really nothing bad in this movie that's gonna hurt anybody's sensibilities for sure. So yeah, well, maybe that's a good place for us to wrap it here. So we'll take a break. I don't know if we'll actually have any commercials here, if we might just jump right into the next spot there. But we'll you'll know if you hear me starting to talk about one of my novels. But yeah, when we come back, we'll look at Die Hard 2.
My newest novel, Don's House in the Mountains, is available now. It follows Don Veazey, who after 20 years has finally made it as a writer, going from an AP English teacher to richer and more famous than he ever could have imagined. In the process, his wife Lois, feeling alienated and resentful of her husband's success, has filed for divorce, forcing Don to move to a house in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. With time alone to reflect, he's able to see how his new wealth and fame has affected his life in ways he never expected. Maybe the biggest of these is his new house, which is bigger and nicer than anything he's ever had in his entire life, but the longer he lives there, the more he gets the sense that it might have magical powers. But that can't be right. A house can't have magical powers, can it? Pick up Don's House in the Mountains today. You can find it at Amazon in paperback and in Kindle.
All right, we are back, and before we get into Die Hard 2, there are a few things about the previous one that I forgot to mention that I probably should. One is talking about my favorite action movies. I can't believe I forgot to throw in Point Break on that list. Point Break is definitely up there as one of my. I don't know. I think I like Point Break better than Die Hard. Whether it's a better movie or not, I don't know. You could go either way. Point Break uses a paradigm that has existed probably since like the 60s, I think. Was Hellcats? Was that, with Ross Hagen? Was that one of the first ones to use that technique of the hero infiltrating the baddies who do the crimes, but then he kind of likes the baddies and kind of grows to like them. So whereas Die Hard creates its own paradigm, Point Break was like a new spin on an old paradigm. So instead of being bikers, they were surfers and extreme athletes, But I've always loved that one. I think I've always loved about that one Catherine Bigelow's approach to an action movie. I think there's so many elements to that were so much fun. So, yeah, Point Break, Commando, and Die Hard are kind of all right there for me. So I should have mentioned that. There's another piece of the movie I completely forgot to. I had it on my notes to talk about was the decision they made to not have the baddies be terrorists, right? they pretend to be terrorists, but they're not actually terrorists. And I think what's great about that is, one, it makes the movie very timeless, because terrorism at that time was I guess it's always a timely thing. It's always it's been present in our culture, especially, it's interesting, it's been present in our culture since 9/11, but really, is it really like, we're not constantly having terrorist attacks, right? If anything, right, the terrorism is, incel white guys with AR-15s that hose down schools and shopping centers and things like that. That's kind of more where our concern is, right? Nobody's blowing up planes anymore, right? Even though we still have to take our shoes off, which I guess part of the reason why nobody blows up planes anymore is because we take our shoes off. I guess maybe that would be what the TSA people would tell you, is why nobody blows up planes anymore. But that's the idea, right? Is that at that time terrorism was still kind of a big thing, but they said, we're not going to use terrorists. We're going to do it as more as these thieves, and it adds a different element to the movie by having them just be thieves, because you don't have to get the political part of them, whether they have a political side or not in the film. There's no side to either sympathize with or be against. So I think that's a really great approach to it. But also, it means the movie, the only thing that sets the movie in time is, when Reginald Val Johnson goes to the convenience store, you see all the old wrappers for things, or the cars, being on the plane, those kinds of things. Like, just the fact that it was shot in '88 is what makes it of its time. But the politics or anything else that's happening at that time, that has nothing to do with it. So I thought that was a really great decision that they made there too, to have these guys be thieves instead of being terrorists. And then one small thing with Holly Gennaro with the name, she mentions that she takes her maiden name because she works for a Japanese company. And this is actually something that I see, when I would recruit teachers to teach online, you'd get CVs from people that live in like Japan. You might see it someplace in other Asian countries like the Philippines. They put their marital status on the resume, which of course in America, right? If you put, if an employer is asking your marital status, right, that's a huge red flag. That's a huge issue, right? You're not supposed to be knowing, marital status only comes into play when you're filling out your thing for your benefits, right, and determining who gets your health benefits here in America when you get a job. But there are, you can't, that's not on your resume. But in Japan, in particular, they've talked about that like, if a woman's married, there's a sense that, well, she's going to leave her job to have kids, that she's not going to be committed to the position, that she wants to be a wife and mother first. And so that's why, Holly, we know the reason why Holly takes her maiden name is because she's estranged from John, and that's why she does it. But she says it's because she wants to, which doesn't make a lot of sense because they know she has kids, right? So, I mean, how much, maybe, she's using it as an excuse, I guess is what you could say. But it is a legitimate excuse in the sense that, like, that if you're married, I don't know if it's still the case in Japan, but it's kind of the thing that if you're married, the thinking is you're going to leave the job to have kids and things like that, which is, again, in America, that would be considered completely unethical. It would get you in trouble, with whatever's left of the the labor board, because obviously many corporations have done a good job defunding those kinds of things so they can get away with crap like that. But yeah, it's it's considered like the word, like it's one of those things where we have to just sort of ignore it if we see it on a resume. It's almost like we have to pretend it doesn't exist because there are other things that people put on resumes in parts of the world that we in America, right, you just would never see, like birth dates and things like that. But definitely like marital status, it's like but it's a real thing. Like when you watch Die Hard, you hear her say that she think obviously she's full of it. She's doing it because she doesn't want to be with John anymore. But it is a legitimate thing that, like, that you would have to put your marital status on your resume when you get a job, if you're a woman, especially in Japan, because that's the thinking. Again, I don't know how much that's still the case, but definitely back then, and even as recently as 5 or 6 years ago, that was still the case. So I figured I'd just mention those few things about the movie that I had in my notes that I just kind of forgot to mention there. All right, so now on to Die Hard 2. So this movie comes out 1990, so a couple of years after Die Hard. Of course, Die Hard is a massive success. I mean, it's a top 10 earner for that year amongst all the movies. It makes Bruce Willis into a runaway star. So, of course, a sequel was coming. We knew a sequel was going to be there. And it's a question of, like, well, what is the sequel going to be? And I guess this one's based off a novel as well, but not by the same author who wrote the movie that, the book that Detective was based off and the book that Die Hard was based off of. But much where they got the idea from for this movie. And it's an interesting one because I like it, right? I like Die Hard 2. I really, it's a fun one that I enjoy. There are some things about it that I don't like, and I'll definitely get into those things. And why this one's not a classic the way that the first one is a classic. But it definitely takes Die Hard up a notch, which I think is what you'd want from a movie like this. That you go next level with it. Obviously, the airplane, the airports. That's always, people are always afraid to fly. The idea of using the airplanes as hostages and having them circle, that's a scary idea, and I can understand, using it. This one was more topical than the previous one in that, William Sadler, he's essentially playing Oliver North, his character. So you've got more topical pieces in this that are not the case with the first movie, where the first one's definitely more timeless. This one is more of its time. Which I think is an interesting difference there. So there's that as well. Maybe I'll do a quick synopsis just to kind of break down kind of what happens with this one, because this one you may not have seen as recently. I don't think people have watched this one as much as they see the first one, for sure. But the plot is simply that John McClane is in D.C. to pick up Bonnie Bedelia, who's flying in from L.A. He has since moved out to L.A. to be with her. He's now an LAPD cop, but he's at Dulles International Airport. It's snowy. It's Christmas time again. His car gets towed, and so he has to call a. He essentially calls her from the plane. She calls him from the plane. They're talking while she's on the plane. But he comes up with this idea to get around the fact that he got. I think it's his mother-in-law's car that he got it towed to essentially rent a car. They're going to have a romantic evening or whatever. And in the process of this kind of thing, he happens to catch some shady guys, including Von D. Curtis Hall, who have they're exchanging bags and they're kind of doing some shady stuff in the airport. So Bruce Willis, John McClane, he can't leave well enough alone. He's got to follow him. So he follows him into where the bags are being kind of, are being loaded onto the plane. And he notices them doing some shady stuff. And so he confronts them. There's a big fight, a big shootout. And, eventually he kills one of the guys. Another one, Von D. Curtis Hall, gets away. And then he gets questioned by Dennis Franz, who is the head of the police department for the airport. And Dennis Franz he's the jerk police officer that gets in the way of everything, right? He's the guy who doesn't like John McClane, gives him a hard time, is complete jerk off. We also have Fred Thompson, the late Fred Thompson, who's there, who he tried to run for president at one time. He was a politician, then started an acting career. I think before he passed away, he was selling reverse mortgages, similar to Tom Selleck. So, that's the kind of actor, kind of guy that he is. But he's the head of the airport, or he runs the director of the airport, and when he talks to McClane about, whatever, hey, McClane's like, listen, there's something more going on here than just a couple guys trying to steal luggage at the airport. These guys were more. I've seen these kind of guys before, right? They're better trained, they're better organized. They weren't just there to steal some luggage; they were there to start some shit. Thompson kind of hears them, kind of not, and then all of a sudden we get the news, right, that William Sadler has, as the baddie, has taken over the airport. He's essentially preventing the guys working on the ground from being able to communicate with the planes. The planes essentially have to circle because they've turned off all the lights on the runway. They can't fly. They can't land. And until they get, I guess there's also topical, right? Manuel Noriega, who had just been arrested from Panama, right? Bush had essentially invaded Panama to and they arrested Manuel Noriega, who's the president of Panama, and extradited him to the U.S. I think he's still in prison here in the U.S. I'm not sure, but I think he might still be in prison here. But they Franco Nero is playing a similar dictator. It's the country of Valverde, which is used in Commando, another Joel Silver movie. But while they're exporting him to the U.S. or deporting him to the U.S. or extraditing him so he can stand trial here, William Sadler's like, no, we're not extraditing him. You're going to land him at the airport. You're going to give us our own plans so we can take him away, and then I will release all of these planes that are circling Dulles International Airport. And now it's up to Bruce Willis to kind of find his way around these, find out where these guys are, take them down, and save the day. And so that's what happens here. This is fun in the Die Hard sense, right? I mean, the idea of it being Die Hard in an airport. They take some of the tenets of the original Die Hard movie and I think use them in a good way. But there's definitely some issues where this movie lacks, or this movie isn't as good as the previous one. I mean, where it works is that they fully embrace further the John McClane living his life 15 minutes at a time. I mean, everything he's doing here is just, I'm running into one problem, I'm going to try to solve it, and then move on to then the next one appears, I'm going to do that as well. And he kind of keeps doing that. Director Rennie Harlan really takes the action to another level, so we get bigger action sequences, bigger explosions, that kind of thing. So all of that is fun, right? And it's a fun story that, overall the story is fun. The story doesn't work for me necessarily, because the thing that it doesn't make any sense to me. At the time, I think I didn't understand how close Baltimore and Washington were to each other. But now that I know, when I'm watching this movie, they make mention of National Airport, which at the time it was Washington National Airport. Now it's Reagan National Airport, so named by Bill Clinton. He signed the bill saying that, why don't we name an airport after a guy who is responsible for a lot of deaths and hardship in this country? Because, Clinton was he was more cool with Reagan than you'd think. So yeah, a lot of, as much as we all loved Clinton in the 90s, he was kind of our fun guy, because we thought life couldn't get any better. He signed a lot of bills that made things bad later on. He's the one who signs Gramm-Leach Bly, which overturns Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall, of course, is a bill signed after the Depression that said banks can either be lending banks or investment banks. They can't be both. Clinton's like, no, let them be both. And then, of course, when you let them be both, you get the financial crisis in 2008. So it's, Clinton's responsible for that. Defense of Marriage Act, which said that you can't have gay marriage in America. He signs that bill. He did mea culpa that after the fact when we eventually allow gay marriage throughout the United States when the court allowed that. But at the time, he was he signed that bill. TANF, making it much more difficult for people to get welfare. That was kind of his big signature a bill that he signed. So people who were struggling, it was harder for them to get welfare in the country. And then, of course, also the Telecommunications Act, which if you want to know what led to the Nickelbackification of music in America, or the trainification of rock music in America, you can go right to the Telecommunications Act, which essentially allowed companies like Clear Channel to run roughshod over the radio industry. And instead of having local program directors, you've got one guy who's a program director for 150 radio stations, and if that guy likes Nickelback, then the radio, all the music studios, all of the labels are going to make sure all of their bands sound like Nickelback to make that guy happy. And so, yeah, what ruined the music industry? Bill Clinton, he ruined music in this country. If you want to know about that, but. We loved him. In the 90s, we thought he was great. He played the sax, he seemed like a cool guy. He had an affair, all that stuff. He seemed a lot of fun. But yeah, looking back on it now, and one of the things he did was he named Dulles, or named Washington National Airport after Ronald Reagan, who's not the greatest president ever. Probably shouldn't have an airport named after himself. It's probably why Donald Trump thinks, hey, why can't I have an airport named after me if Reagan can? But anyway, all that, big aside I just did there. Coming back to the movie, Fred Thompson makes a comment about, because the weather being so bad, National Airport can't take any more flights. So that's essentially this idea that, okay, they can't just move the planes to National Airport, the other airport in DC, and land them there, because they can't take anybody. That's essentially how they eliminate that. The thing is, Baltimore Washington International Airport is only 60 miles northeast of Dulles Airport. If you watch, recently when we had Rich Haas on the DTV Connoisseur podcast, we talked about One More Shot, which takes place at Baltimore Washington International. Of course, it's shot in England, but the whole idea, right, is that this guy who knows about the dirty bomb explosion, he is taken to Baltimore Washington International, where he's going to be transported to DC from there, right? That's the idea, because those airports are so close. At the time, again, I didn't know how close Baltimore and Washington were. I do now. To be honest, me living here in Philly, I didn't realize how close Philly was to any of these cities, and I realize now, they're, close to all of them. So even Philadelphia wouldn't have been that bad for, especially some of the planes that had extra fuel. Considering how long they're circling the airport at Dulles, they could have made it to Philly as well. And the idea is supposed to be that the planes can't communicate with Dulles International Airport, with the crews on the ground there, but they can communicate with each other and they could communicate, they could conceivably communicate with the other airports. We don't know that William Sadler has taken over, Baltimore Washington International, right, or Philly International, where they could just easily fly to. So it didn't make any sense that these planes were just circling instead of just being like, hey, you know what, we got to land. The other thing is that the Potomac or Chesapeake Bay, Chesapeake Bay is right near there. Now, granted, we didn't have, we didn't know about, Captain Sully landing a plane in the Hudson Bay that had, seagulls get in the engines. So maybe we didn't know so much about how that worked, but considering how much this movie talks about different elements of the aviation industry, you'd think they'd have an idea. You'd think they'd know that, yeah, you can do a water landing if you need to. And that might have been what these planes could have done. Now, granted, yes, it's the middle of the winter. It's freezing. The water's freezing there. Granted, even me as a Mainer who's used to water being freezing cold, I probably would not be a fan of that, landing in the Chesapeake Bay and having to, kind of, do the raft thing. But, the Coast Guard's right near there. The Coast Guard can come pick people up. So that part of it, especially watching it now, it doesn't make any sense to have these planes flying over, circling like that when they could just go to another airport and land and call it good. There's just no point to that. So that's one area of this movie that just, especially watching it now, just doesn't make any sense. Doesn't work for me. The other piece, of course, is that they crash one of the planes, right? You've got the Calmini piloted flight from England, and they crash it. And effectively what they're doing is blowing up kids, right? You can't get around it. There's no other way to say it. They're killing kids in this movie. And anytime a movie kills kids, it's going in a dark direction. Now, granted, again, we didn't have, for example, 9/11. I remember when 9/11 happened, you'd see, CNN had this crawl, a couple days after that listed all of the victims on the planes and their ages. So they put the ages there, and you'd see a name and then the number 2, and it's like, oh, that was a 2-year-old that died on that plane. You don't want to think about that kind of thing. It's a horrible thing to have to be talking about. And maybe from the movie standpoint, it's just a concept, whereas now, that we've lived through 9/11, we say it's not just a concept, right? It's a real thing, and kids dying on planes, that's not a fun thing to be having in your movie. But I think even in 1990, even when I was a kid watching that movie, I was like, man, they just blew up kids. You don't really blow up kids a lot in movies, right? It's just not, when you take a movie there and you say, I'm going to blow up kids, it's definitely making a movie darker than it needs to be. Now, I'm not saying that means that you can't watch this movie on a Saturday night with some friends with some pizza and beer. It still retains that quality enough, but it is a bit of a rough thing. I mean, and I guess apparently it was supposed to be even rougher. Apparently, Rennie Harlan had sequences of people on the plane, including the kids, kind of running up the aisles with the flames and everything like that. So he actually was going to make it even more graphic than that. And apparently Fox didn't want the scene in the film, and they wanted it to be an empty cargo plane. And then I guess when they screened it for audiences were like, I'm not so bad, I'm not so bad. Which, to be fair, I can kind of see that as well, because we live in America where we're not so bad about school shootings. A lot of people don't seem to care too much about school shootings either. So I can see if you get the right audience, in there, that people that 30 years later wouldn't care about school shootings probably also wouldn't care about fictitious kids in a movie getting blown up on a plane. So there's that as well. But for me, that was a bit much. I think if they'd gone with the cargo ship idea, it would have been a little bit different than blowing up the kids. The other thing, of course, is at the end of the movie, right? McClane, he does the whole yippee-ki-yay motherfucker, and he had ripped open, or he pulled out the fuel, opened up the fuel thing on the plane as the baddies are escaping. He had opened up the fuel door so that there's gas flying everywhere, and he's like, yippee-ki-yay motherfucker, and he sets the gas on fire, and it goes all the way up to the plane and blows everything up. But of course, also what happens is that flame burns up the tarmac, so now the planes can see the flame and they land. Weird that they didn't think of that one before, right? What if we've got all this flammable stuff here? What if we just lighted what if we just lit the tarmac on fire and had people land through that? Couldn't we have tried that one? So, there are a lot of ways to get around this issue. And again, someone like McClane, who is, we see in the first movie, we see in this movie as well how resourceful he is, that if he's this resourceful, why is he not coming up with some of these ideas? At one point he's got these two, when the Calmini plane is landing, he's trying to warn them by waving these two torches, and it doesn't work, which is another issue, I think, for me with this movie, because one of the things I loved about the first movie was that as he's living his life in these 15-minute increments, he's always solving the problem to get himself another 15 minutes. And I think it's one of the things you want with him in this movie is you want him to keep getting us another 15 minutes. And he doesn't get us 15 minutes there, right? All of these people, including kids, die on this plane. So it's another thing too. We kind of lose a little bit of the John McClane magic. And I think that's another piece of it. You want to keep having the magic. Again, this is also technically a Christmas movie. And part of the Christmas movie thing is the Christmas miracle. And so, yeah, when he loses a little bit of the magic, it does kind of hurt it a little bit for me that happens there. So these are all reasons why this movie is just kind of a good action movie and not a classic the way the first one is. Another point you can make, again, is we talked about the fact that in the first movie, everybody is who they say they are. Well, in this one, John Amos shows up who's supposed to be helping them, and we find out, no, he's one of Sadler's guys. And his guys are Sadler's guys, and they're turncoats, and they end up, going, helping out Sadler and not being part of the team to help everybody stop these baddies here. Again, it's one of those cheap techniques that they don't do it in part 3. I was happy they didn't do it in part 3. I think they might do it in some of the other ones. We'll see if they do or not. But it's one of those cheap action movie techniques that I was glad that they didn't do in the first one, and kind of disappointed they didn't do here. Just bring John Amos in and have him be a jerk from the beginning. Why not? Let's just why do we need the whole turncoat thing? But anyway, so there's a reason why the movie didn't work for me. But why it works, again, is I love Bruce Willis as John McClane. He's so much fun here. There's so many co-stars in this movie. So many like other, I don't want to say co-stars, but like other names that are just kind of alongside. So obviously the big names, right? Willis, William Sadler, he appears on John Cross's podcast. He was on relatively recently talking about his music endeavor that he was doing. So really interesting. He's a star of a movie like this, and he'll be on podcasts, and so he's been on with John a few times. They have a good relationship, so it's kind of cool seeing him here, knowing that we've heard him on those podcasts. But yeah, so he's our baddie, and then you've got John Amos. One of the things I think too about William Sadler's baddie is that his baddie could have been the way that they wrote his baddie. He's more the henchman, like the number one guy to the main baddie. And I think they were trying to have Franco Nero in some ways be the main baddie, but it didn't work. And I think they should have had Sadler be one or the other. He either needed to be the main baddie, or he needed to be the one in second in command, and there needed to be a main baddie above him who was like well superior, and we understood the hierarchy. So that was one area there too, is that we don't get the full-on great baddie that we get from Alan Rickman, because he's not written the way that Alan Rickman's was written. But he was a lot of fun as well. Obviously, we talked about John Amos, talked about Fred Thompson, talked about people like Von D. Curtis Hall, names like that. Robert Patrick is one of the henchmen in this. I was trying to think of all the, because they're just from the henchmen alone, you get some really, really great names. I don't know if you heard me drop my phone charger, hit the chair there, but yeah, one of the names that I love, one of the baddies that I love is the guy who played Meat from if you remember Porky's, right? He kills. So when they take over the when they for their command base, they take over a nearby church, and there's an old guy living there, and he gets killed. And one of the people that kills him is Terry Ganos, or Ganios. I think Ganios is his name. But yeah, you may know him. He played Meat in Porky's. Remember, he was like the big basketball star, and I think Porky. I think they drug him or something, tried to take him away, and the guys have to go rescue him. He's got the ABH on his shorts for Angel Beach High. I always loved that. John Leguizamo, he was supposed to have a bigger part, and apparently when they discovered how short he was, they shrunk the size of the part. So he, unfortunately didn't get as big of a part. Mark Boone Jr., who you may not recognize because he's not as big and he's not as hairy in this, but definitely he's there. Definitely. I loved having him in this movie. I was trying to think. There were some names that I hadn't seen. Obviously we mentioned Cole Meany, but I was trying to think of some of the names that kind of the smaller ones. I mean, again, like the John Ganios that's there. Oh, right. So we get obviously we have William Atherton as the reporter, right? He's on the flight with Holly, and of course he has a restraining order against him. He's still like the seedy, gross reporter. But then we have another reporter who's not as seedy, right? She's actually cooler, and Bruce Willis works with her to kind of get some help at certain points. And her cameraman is played by Rick Domeyer. I believe it's her cameraman. Maybe it might be another cameraman, but Rick Domeyer is one of the cameramen. We love Rick Domeyer, here on the site. He's obviously in Evil Dead 2. He does QVC now. He's a lot of fun on there. So yeah, getting any kind of Rick Domeyer is just always a lot. I'm always up for Domeyer. So yeah, get him in there anytime you can. So yeah, it's one of those things where, when you get these kinds of these smaller names in a movie like this, and I think it's part of what makes this movie a little bit more fun is seeing all the people in it. Being able to say like, oh yeah, that guy's in this or that guy. I'm always appreciative of that kind of thing. I mean, we do get a small part from Reginald VelJohnson. He's got like 2 scenes in the movie. I guess the deal was that he was doing Family Matters at that time, so he couldn't shoot as much of the film, so he wasn't in it as much. But he was another. They kind of keep furthering the joke about him eating too many Twinkies. So you have that part there as well. So that part, I think, especially with these like late '80s, early '90s ones, like seeing people that I recognize from other things, that's always a lot of fun. So I appreciate that part of it in the movie. I mean, some of the action scenes, I mean, they go a little bit more over the top with some of the action, but I appreciated that part. So that kind of stuff worked for me there. But yeah, the other thing, of course, with this movie is that this movie does better than Die Hard, than the first Die Hard. Now, it has a bit bigger budget, not that much bigger, but it is a slightly bigger budget. And it's like it ends up being the number 7 film globally for that year, whereas Die Hard was the number 10 film, and I think it makes a little over $100 million more in the box office, which for that time was a bigger deal than it might be today. Where now they're calculating box office wins in the billions. I think Ghost was the number 1 movie for that year, 1990, and it made $500 million. If you ever look at that up, look up some of those. If you ever look up some of the box office earnings for those years in the 80s, the movies that you see in the top 10 grossing films are movies that we would never expect to see anymore. I mean, I think is it 89 that has Dead Poets Society? It's movie like Dead Poets Society wouldn't even be released in the theater anymore, right? You wouldn't put Dead Poets Society in the theater, but now it's like, yeah, we're gonna put Dead Poets Society in the theater. I always love that because I guess it kind of brings me back to a time when movies were different. When more things could get in the theater, more things could be successful in the theater. Whereas now it's like, is it a comic book movie? You get the Venn, like the question, yes, no. If it's no, okay, well, is it a Pixar movie? No, okay. Then is it another franchise? No, then yeah, it's not going to the theater. That's it. We've already made our decision there. So yeah, I think. 1988 was Rain Man, but yeah, it was 1990 was Ghost, which I can't believe that movie was the number 1 and that it made that much money. I mean, I don't know what 500 million is. Is that like 750 million now? Which, I mean, that's what if you were doing a comic book movie and your movie makes that's kind of what you want that kind of number, 750. But even $500 million, that's a pretty good number for a movie today, depending on what the budget is, right? If the budget isn't like 250 million, 500 million is a pretty good haul. And the fact that Ghost pulled that, I mean, again, Ghost would not make it anywhere. Ghost would be straight to Netflix if they made that today. But anyway, the year this movie came out, the year Die Hard 2 came out, Ghost pulled in like a good 250 million more than it, I think, something like that. It's just insane. Also, we were just talking about Presumed Innocent, right, with Harrison Ford, who had turned down. He didn't do Die Hard, the first Die Hard. He did Presumed Innocent the same year this came out, and it was right underneath Die Hard. It was the number 8 movie that year. And of course, then we have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which was a big one. I mean, I remember Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I mean, going to see that one. That was like everywhere. That was like, it was always packed. I think I saw it twice and it was packed both times. But yeah, Die Hard 2. It was a bit of an event deal. People wanted to see this movie in the theater, and it did well enough. Did well enough that it got a sequel, right? That we did get a third movie. We'll talk about that one here in a bit. But yeah, I was trying to think if there's anything else that I missed on this one that I wanted to mention. I mean, I guess we could mention that the William Sadler naked Tai Chi scene. Apparently, that wasn't supposed to be naked in the script. So Rennie Harlan went to him and said, "Hey, do you want to do this naked? Because I think it'd be cooler if you did it naked." He's like, "I'll do it naked if you allow me to shoot it at the end of the shooting schedule, so I can get in shape for it." And so yeah, that's what they did. So he got buff, and then they filmed him doing nude Tai Chi. So I think it's the next one we'll be talking about where it got an R rating, and so the director John McTiernan just threw in a sex scene just because he's like, well, if it's R-rated, might as well do everything if it's a R-rated movie. So this movie doesn't have any sex scenes. Nothing like that happens in this one. So, but yeah, I think we've covered everything here. So again, I think I did a lot of bashing of this movie. I feel like I had more negative to say about it than I probably should have. I enjoy it. I really like this movie. It's not the classic that the first one is. I don't know if I'm thinking of like my top 50 action movies. I don't know if this falls in there. It's probably got to make top 50, but yeah, probably not a top 20. Thinking about some of these more recent ones, like a John Wick or a Captain America: Winter Soldier or like Expendables. I would put those above this movie, whereas I would not put those above Die Hard. Die Hard is a level above them. But yeah, I would I think Expendables. I like Expendables better than this movie. So, but you can't go wrong with this thing. This was a staple on TV growing up. I saw it I don't know how many times when it was on TV. I hadn't seen it for a while recently, so it was kind of fun to do a rewatch here as well. And so it's not good to see it immediately after Die Hard, right? Like you see how great Die Hard is, and then you see this one, and it's kind of more on the pedestrian side, despite some really great action sequences. So it's easier to maybe look at it with a jaundiced eye. But yeah, I for all the negativity, I think you can still like this one. So, yeah, why don't we'll stop this one here, and then when we come back, again, not sure if we'll have a commercial or not, but when we come back, we'll finish up with Die Hard with a Vengeance.
It's the early 90s in LA. The war on drugs is raging, and Detective John Bainbridge is the LAPD's secret weapon against crime. Former Special Forces in Nam, he's a cop on the edge. When he and his partner Geary uncover a potential human trafficking ring, it doesn't take long before John Bainbridge realizes this thing goes all the way to the top, which doesn't scare him. That just means they'll fall that much harder when he takes them down. Part send-up and part love letter to early 90s action films, Bainbridge will take you back to the golden days of Canon, PM Entertainment, and AIP. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited from Amazon. Follow the link in the podcast description.
All right, we are back, and we're going to wrap this up with our look at Die Hard with a Vengeance from 1995. So I feel like that last segment was a little hard on Clinton, a little hard on Die Hard 2, a little harder on both than I thought. I didn't go in planning on litigating Bill Clinton's presidency, but I think that the Reagan, anything about Reagan, I know he's got that new movie out right now. It's like, for us that lived Reagan, he wasn't that great of a guy. One of the interesting things, too, just as an aside with Reagan, I think this new movie paints it as like he was responsible for the fall of the Soviet Union. Actually, social scientists on the ground in the late 80s, early 90s, especially in the early 90s, who kind of, were there for the aftermath, said actually that wasn't the case. It was actually Reagan's belligerent rhetoric against the Soviet Union actually propped them up through the 80s. It led for more hawkish members of the regime to have more sway and keep things kind of going. Probably would have collapsed, especially with what happened in Afghanistan earlier in the 80s if it hadn't been for Reagan. So actually, Reagan wasn't responsible. It was kind of one of those things where, like, I think they would have wanted to hold on until he was out of power. But yeah, it wasn't Reagan. Reagan actually made the Soviet Union last longer. So for people that lived under that Soviet regime who had to deal with some of the more onerous elements of that, they have Reagan to thank for that as well. So yeah, another thing you probably don't know, because it is kind of depicted as like he was the reason that the Soviet Union fell, and that's not the case. I think that this movie with Dennis Quaid kind of tries to sell you on that, but don't buy it. It's not the case. But anyway, minute and a half there, kind of wasted. Let's get right into Die Hard with a Vengeance here. It comes out in 1995. I read that the plan was not for it to come out in 1995. They wanted it to come out sooner. They wanted to kind of keep with the original cadence of a movie every 2 years or so. But some things got in the way. One was that at that time, who was one, Joel Silver, who was once, sort of the darling of action films and darling producer in Hollywood, he had become a little bit difficult to deal with, and studios were kind of tired of him. In some cases, they were barring him from movies that he was producing because he was just getting too involved and causing too many issues. He did have a falling out with Bruce Willis. I think Hudson Hawk was another. It was another producer, Lawrence Gordon, but maybe it was Last Boy Scout that he wasn't a fan of. But he had issues with Silver. The studios had issues, so that led to some delays. The other thing that's interesting was they had trouble finding a good script for Die Hard. And originally they were going to do a cruise idea. So the idea would be that Willis and Bonnie Bedelia, Holly, they were going to go on a cruise to the Caribbean, and then terrorists take over hijack the ship, and he'd have to make his way through the ship. What happens, of course, is they discover that stealing the Die Hard paradigm, that Warner was doing. I think it was Warner I think it was Warner that was doing Under Siege. And when they discovered that they were doing Under Siege, they were like, okay, well, we can't do our movie because it wasn't going to be out in time, right? They weren't going to get theirs out before. It's interesting how sometimes they do that. Sometimes they're just like, let's just do 2 volcano movies, right? Like let's just do 2 whatever, 2 ski movies or whatever it is that happens at the time. But in this case, they were like, no, we're not. If they're going to do a Seagal movie with Under Siege, we're not going to do Under Siege. There was a rumor that script kind of stuck around and then became Speed 2, Cruise Control, but that's actually not the case. That movie was completely. The person who wrote that movie had no idea that this existed. So that's one thing that happens there, is that, and I guess I'd read too that, and I don't know if this is true, that there was actually supposed to be a 3-word title for Under Siege to keep with the Seagal 3-word title thing. So that was actually a conscious thing that they were doing, the 3-word titles. We joke about the 3-word titles, and I know Ty and Brett had come up and they always joke that what led to the downfall of Seagal's career was Under Siege because it was a 2-word title instead of a 3-word title. They were conscious of that, but they thought Under Siege was a better title, so they went with that. But anyway, that causes a delay there. And another thing was that I guess there was like 30 Die Hard INAs in development in the major studios. And they have a list of them, and none of them really got made. But it also meant that they were like, well, we can't do a Die Hard INA, right? For our 3rd Die Hard movie, we've got to do something different because everybody's doing Die Hard INA now. So that also led to delays in getting the film off the ground. And so the plot that they actually go with, the original piece of it, the Simon Says piece of it, that was actually supposed to be the sequel to Rapid Fire, which unfortunately, Rapid Fire wasn't going to be made because Brandon Lee died making The Crow. But they had planned to have him make a sequel to Rapid Fire that would have been Simon Says, and it would have been essentially the beginning of this movie that we're, Die Hard with a Vengeance. So these delays happen, but we do finally get it off the ground in the 90s. We were talking about things being topical. When they released the movie, that's when the Oklahoma City bombing happened. So whereas next year is going to be 30 years since the Oklahoma City bombing. That was up until 9/11. That was the largest terrorist attack on American soil. It's still, for the people of Oklahoma City, that's still a major. Something that still resonates with them. I think for us as Americans, that was just a huge thing. And I know like Melrose Place, they had removed an explosion that they were going to have in a storyline. And this movie thought about that, but they just decided to go with it because the explosions don't kill anybody really. And they just removed them from the advertising. But it was something that was on people's minds. It was very kind of top of mind at that time in 1995 that had happened. That's one of the pieces there. I guess maybe I'll get in on the story a little bit quickly here, and then I'll kind of get into what I liked, what I didn't like about this one. So the idea with this one is it takes place, however many years after Part 2. John McClane is back to being a New York Police Department police officer. His wife is now kind of they're estranged at this point. Holly, she's over in LA still working for Nakatomi. We don't see her, we just know that they're estranged. And then the Bonwit teller in New York City, in Manhattan, blows up. And nobody knows what happened there. And then this mysterious guy calls the police department and says, yeah, I want John McClane, if you don't want anything else blown up, John McClane's got to do what I say. And he comes up with this idea for John McClane to go to Harlem with a sandwich board that says, I hate N-words. Only it's not N-words, right? It's the actual word. And before he's killed by some gang members or some guys sitting on the street, I don't know if it was clear that they were gang members. Samuel L. Jackson swoops in, saves him. They escape, and Jeffrey Irons is like, oh well, if this guy's or not, we don't know if Jeffrey Irons yet. We don't know that it's, or Jeremy Irons. Sorry, Jeremy Irons. We don't know that it's him yet. We discover later that it's him, but in the meantime, they go to the police department, and this mysterious figure's like, well, okay, if you're involved, Mr. Samuel L. Jackson. You are now you now have to accompany him on these wild goose chases that I'm leading him on. So as they're leading him on these wild goose chases, the baddies, the full scope of what they want to do is kind of similar to the first movie, where there's a heist involved, and actually there's more to it than just wanting to either run Bruce Willis on a wild goose chase around New York City. That they actually have some stuff in mind they want to do. And so as Willis starts to figure it out and get to the bottom of it, he becomes that fly in the ointment. But this is not this is an interesting one, because the Simon Says technique, it kind of creates the Die Hard inna, but it's completely all over New York City and in sort of the upstate a little bit in Westchester County. It takes place in a lot of different parts of the New York City area. So he's not really confined to a space like an airport or a skyscraper. And again, I think that's part of their process of wanting to get out from underneath the Die Hard thing, because everybody was doing Die Hard in it at that time. So I mean, the way I feel about this one, I like it. I definitely enjoy it. I think these three movies together, they make a good trilogy. I was trying to think of myself what I remember of it when it came out, because it was interesting when you do that 5-year period between 1990 and 1995. For me, I was 11 in 1990, 16 in 1995, which it's funny, now at this point in my life where I'm 45, where 5 years doesn't really mean a lot. It's an interesting thing. Like the difference between 40 and 45 isn't really that much. Yes, 45 and 50, it's going to be 50, but even then it's not going to be the same as 11 and 16, right? The difference between 11 and 16 is huge. So trying to think of like what I thought about a movie like that at that time. The other thing too is I liked action movies. I shouldn't say I didn't. I liked action movies, but there was a sense that post 1994, where I had seen Clerks, I'd seen Pulp Fiction. I had gotten into a little bit more indie stuff. Priscilla, Queen of the Desert was when I started seeing foreign films at the art, indie art house place, because Clerks got me in the door there at that place. The action movie, it's not that I didn't like the action movie. I liked them, but and I don't want to say I was getting too cool for them. It wasn't the same as it was at 16, when it was like, a freshman is wearing a Prodigy shirt. Well, I don't like Prodigy anymore. Like that kind of thing, how I was, with music. I was like, I don't like that band because, everybody else likes them. I'm going to, dig in on like what was on at 1:45 on 120 Minutes and buy up all their records at the record store downtown Portsmouth. That it wasn't like that kind of feel for movies, but I also know that I was a little bit like action movies. Like it wasn't like I was like I didn't like them, but the big ones, the big action ones like this, it was like I was kind of over it a bit. The action movies I liked were the turn on cable and PM Entertainment kind of deals that I didn't even really know what they were. It was just like, yeah, flip that car. That's beautiful. I like that kind of thing more at that time. So I don't think I would have been as big of a fan of this anyway. I didn't see it in the theater. I definitely know that. R-rated movie at that time at 16, I would have been able to get in probably even without getting signed in by my parents. Depending, there was this one woman who worked at the movie theater near us who was a stickler on IDs. I remember even into our late 20s, she would try to card people, and it's like, really, you're carding people for an R-rated movie? It's like, okay, I can't go to Gran Torino with Clint Eastwood because you're, even though I'm in my 30s. It's like, yeah. So there's one that was like that. There was one who did that kind of thing, but for the most part, nobody was carding people for R-rated movies. And it's always it's an interesting thing. If that woman is still with us, she's not that much older. She probably was born like in the early 60s, if I were to hazard a guess based on her age at that time. It'd be interesting to talk to her and find out what leads a person to be someone who cards people at the movie theater. Because it's not like it was a policy there, because nobody else did it, right? It was just her. Like, what kind of things happen to you in life that get you to a point where you're like, I'm going to give these kids a hard time, or not even these kids, I'm going to give these people in their 20s a hard time but going to see an R-rated movie. I don't know. Like, there's got to be things that happen in your past that, that create that kind of mindset that like you've got to give people a hard time. Now, granted, you could go in the completely other direction. I remember my poor sister, when she was working at a place that served alcohol, she was like, she had that mindset of like, oh man, yeah, I'm gonna serve everybody alcohol, right? I don't care, and then it's like underage kids went in as a sting thing and it got the place busted. So you got to have some, I guess there's some gray area, but I mean, letting kids in to see, letting 20 somethings in who might be 17, but probably are in their 20s. Letting them into see an R-rated movie, that's a little bit different, right? You don't have to, it's like, it's, I should say my sister was a lot younger too at that time. She was in her early 20s, but she was just trying to be cool, and be like, yeah, I'll let you kids get some beer, not realizing that they were stings, The whole idea of the sting thing, like, too, I guess that's another thing I don't get is the sting thing. Like what are you doing with taxpayer dollars that you've got to run stings on, like, establishments that sell alcohol? Like, if they, are yes, I can see if they're letting like 12-year-olds drink, then like, yeah, maybe you want to bust them. But maybe you find out if they're letting 12-year-olds drink. Like, do you do stings? Like, what are we doing here? It's like, I don't know, like so it's like it's like watching, like, what is it, like, a procedural, right, where like, David Boreanaz or somebody, like, they're sitting there with their shirt off, right, and like the agents are there putting the wire on them, and it's like, all right, you got to go in there and you got to get it on tape. You got to get them what they're saying. Well, I got to just get them to sell you alcohol without carding you. Okay, all right, I'm gonna do it. We're gonna get this bust, and we're gonna get this illegal alcohol selling to people under 21 ring busted here in town. I don't. So hey, it's America, right? It's what we do here. We spend a lot of resources busting establishments from selling alcohol to kids that are probably maybe slightly under 21. But we. School shootings, right? We're still okay with those. That's that's America for you. But anyway, I'm getting off track here because it's 1995 and I'm 16 years old and I'm going into R-rated movies, except for this one woman who didn't let us into R-rated movies, and apparently that's still something that sticks with me to this day. And I'm unfortunately making you're all listening to it, and I say making, it's not making, because I'll probably find out that that's the point where everybody stops listening to this episode and they want to get to 1995's Die Hard with a Vengeance, and they got annoyed that I went off on track like that. So anyway, getting back on track here. Things about this movie that I liked. I liked that the action was even bigger. I liked that this one feels like a truer sequel to the second one. And in a way, because the second one also feels like a truer sequel to the first one, I should say. This one feels like a truer sequel to the first one, but the second one also does, which is an interesting idea. It's almost like these are two, it's like part 2A and part 2B instead of 2 and 3, the way they do that. Jeremy Irons, he's a really, really great baddie. Making sure I get his name right, because it's funny how I am with names. I'm just, but Jeremy Irons, he's more Euro trashy than even Alan Rickman is. I mean, he looks like, well, how did I want to describe it? He looks like somebody who would have been in like Duran Duran, like a Simon Le Bon type, like after the 80s, like in 1995. I mean, think about like was it Ordinary World, right? Or Come Undone. Remember those videos where suddenly the guys were wearing less makeup, but their hair was bleached, or they were kind of walking around with suits with puffy sleeves coming out, stuff like that. Like that was him in this movie, right? He was going to be definitely doing that kind of thing. Maybe you can imagine him listening to Come Undone. I could see that. That was his mood. I don't know. Do actors when they're setting up to be a character, do they have a mood board? Because I would think Jeremy Irons is baddie here, he's Hans Gruber's brother. That's what we find out. I feel like he would have done some. What was that? The Wedding album, Duran Duran. He'd be playing some Wedding album to get himself into character to play this part. But he's a great baddie. It's a fun baddie. I think the difference between his baddie and William Sadler's in the previous one is that he's written a little bit more consistently. I think that's a better piece of it. Again, I really liked William Sadler's baddie, but I wish it had been written a little bit more consistently. This one is, so that helps. So you've got the action elements. They're good. Again, it's almost like this movie has, in some cases, it has like direct corrections from the previous movie, or even it's like calling out the previous movie for certain things, because we get this huge sequence, right, where Jeremy Irons tells the police department, hey, there's like 1,100 schools in the New York school district. One of them's got a bomb in it, and if you don't diffuse it. You got 3 hours to take care of it. And so that's what they do for 3 hours. They go kind of searching. They find out that it's actually the 21st president, Chester A. Arthur, and there's a Chester A. Arthur school. That's where the bomb is. I used to have a shirt. There's a shirt company in the late 2000s that had these kind of funny presidential ones. And one of them was like Chester A. Asslicker or something like that. I didn't have that one. I had the Martin Van Buren one. It said Van fucking Buren. I think that was the shirt that I had. But yeah, presidential humor, right? You got to get into it. Chester A. Arthur, I think he was one that had like the mustache that connected to the sideburns. I think that was the look that he had there. But anyway, that's the school. And so you've got, Graham Greene is in this movie. He's helping. They're trying to evacuate the kids out of the school, and the bomb guy is working on it, and it seems like he's not going to make it. And suddenly this thing like spews out like a bunch of red. What they say they call it pancake syrup now. It's corn syrup. And he's like, wait, what? There was no bomb here. And they Bruce Willis mentions this to Jeremy Irons, and he's like, I'm not going to blow up kids. Like, that's, I'm not an animal, right? And it's like, hey, Reddy Harlan, yeah, I'm not an animal. I don't blow up kids, Make sure your Call Meany plane is empty, doesn't have any kids on it when you blow it up on the tarmac, So I kind of appreciated that, yeah, we don't blow up kids in our Die Hard 3, even if it's an R-rated movie. We leave the kids alone. We also had, what is his name? Aldous, I can't believe I'm totally... drawing a blank. I had it written down here. But actor that one of the younger kids in the movie is Aldous Hodge. He is one of the younger kids in the movie who's now grown up. He's now an adult. So it's kind of cool to see him. I think he actually was in the fifth Die Hard movie as a different character. But yeah, so he's one of the kids that escapes, that doesn't get blown up at the school. But yeah, so I like that piece of it there. Now there's obviously a lot of controversy with that first scene or not first scene, but that early scene where Willis is walking in Harlem with the sandwich board that says "I hate N-words," and I know like they originally weren't going to do it, Fox didn't want them to do it, and then I guess the screenwriter or somebody said the screenwriter said, I'm going to take the movie somewhere else if you don't let us do it. And I think at that point they'd had so many delays with Die Hard, they were like, okay, this script works well enough. Let's just do it. We'll go with it. I think today, obviously, it wouldn't happen. You wouldn't have a scene like that in that movie. But I think the reason why I don't like it as a scene, yes, obviously the N-word is a very powerful, strong word. It's the kind of thing that if you did it in America now, like especially if you went to a black community like, for example, Harlem, you wouldn't be protected by the First Amendment if you did something like that. Like the First Amendment has kind of carve-outs for things what they call hate speech, that essentially language that incites people to violence. Similar to like if I'm on a subway and I yell fire, that's not protected by the First Amendment. That kind of thing also isn't, because it can be so insightful. By the same token, I think this idea that like Jeremy Irons, his character wants Bruce Willis to be killed that way, like, oh, I'm going to put him into Harlem with the N-word on a placard like that, and black people are going to kill him. That's what's going to happen. I don't know. I think, and it's kind of this trope, right? The like, oh boy, you're in the black neighborhood, what's going to happen to you, kind of thing. That I think movies at that time did too much, and now they fortunately they don't do to the same extent anymore. But I think it's something that it didn't help matters when it came to situations like trying to help out impoverished neighborhoods. This idea of a tough neighborhood and people not wanting to go there, not wanting to be there, don't park your car there, all that kind of thing. This movie just sort of plays on those stereotypes, and I think that's kind of it kind of, even though we get to see Samuel L. Jackson's character as a fully three-dimensional character, he's fully fleshed out, he's not one-dimensional. The idea of sort of these monolithic, young African-American men sitting on a stoop that will kill you for having the N-word on a placard like that. I think it's just a bad image. It just sort of keeps furthering some of these bad stereotypes, and so I think for me, I didn't like it. I watch it and it's like it's not I don't know. It just seemed hacky too. It's funny because they don't go the hacky route in terms of the John Amos thing, like in the previous movie. I guess I prefer the John Amos hacky to this kind of hacky. But yeah, I think they thought it was a very creative thing and it wasn't that creative. I don't there are other ways that they could have gotten Samuel L. Jackson into the movie. And I mean, to be honest, Samuel L. Jackson is fantastic. I really loved him, and I love the idea of him and Willis working together. I love the idea of Willis with the whole "I'm living my life 15 minutes at a time," because they still keep that part of it up. But the idea that now you've got somebody who's helping him. It's almost like Samuel Jackson figures out, he has a similar mindset. He has a similar idea of he does often think of the bigger picture more, but he also has a similar mindset of like, I'm living my life 15 minutes at a time, because that's how he saves Bruce Willis and gets him out of that situation when he's in Harlem and he starts to get attacked for having the placard on, or the sandwich board. So I did like that. I did like his character, and again, I Bruce Willis is fun in this as well. Jeremy Irons is a great baddie. I also like the fact that we don't have the jerk cop giving him a hard time. These are police officers that are working. I mean, there's a little bit early on where they're kind of like, they're kind of jerk, but no, I think that was a construct that they're like, okay, the Dennis Franz thing might have been too much in part 2. Let's just remove it altogether from part 3 and not have any jerk cops giving him a hard time. So it's all him having to take care of things. I also love the fact that, the first movie, there's a sense of LA in it. There's a sense of a New York guy being in LA that I liked. But LA isn't a character in that movie. And of course, definitely not in Washington, D.C. They don't do anything that's about Dulles or about Washington, D.C. in the second movie. In this movie, they fully embrace the New York as a character part. And that's something I really loved. Whether it's just naming highways, they're on the FDR, you can't drive dump trucks on the FDR. I saw that the Merritt Parkway in Connecticut, which is a highway that I'm familiar with, is really nice. If you're driving from Connecticut to New York City, it's a little bit out of the way, but the Merritt Parkway, it's a nicer drive for sure. When it's a parkway, it means there's no big trucks on there as well. But they did shoot a little bit on the Merritt Parkway, so that's a nice ride. But anyway, so you get those elements there. He's driving through Central Park. I guess the screenwriter had this idea of like, traffic can be so bad in New York City. Like, oh, what if I just drove through Central Park to get away from the traffic? And then he puts it in the movie, right? The 3 train. I've been on the 3 train before. The 3 train going down to Wall Street, right? I've taken it. I think you can take it all the way to Brooklyn. I think because the 3 train, because the Brooklyn Nets, when they play in their arena, they use kind of iconography from the subway on there. So like if somebody shoots a 3-pointer, they use the symbol for the 3 train on the scoreboard. So I've been on the 3 train before. Kind of it's fun to kind of see those kinds of things in the movie. I don't think it was the actual 3 train. I can't of course it's been since 1995. But I don't know how much they've really upgraded the trains in New York City. So it's probably 1995 trains are probably what they're still running now. But anyway, it's kind of just fun to have those elements in the movie, and so this movie does a lot of that, which is true, which is good. It is a 1995 action film, right? It's kind of interesting because 1994 comes in 1994. It sort of changes the game a bit when it comes to action, because suddenly these big over-the-top blockbuster action movies were not considered as cool anymore. When you've got Pulp Fiction and you've got Clerks, and you could probably tack on Shawshank to that list. When these movies are there, suddenly especially for people my age, there was this understanding of like, oh, there's a whole other side to movies that I didn't know. That I'm gonna go to the video store and rent a foreign film. I'm gonna watch a movie with subtitles. Bravo at that time showed foreign films. It's crazy to think, right, that Bravo would show anything like that. But yeah, Bravo in the early mid 90s, that's the kind of stuff they showed. I remember a friend, Mike Petrowski, who I'm hoping to have on the site, I mentioned earlier in this episode, he taped Max Headroom when it aired on Bravo, and he taped Twin Peaks when it aired on Bravo. He also taped V when that aired on Bravo. But I remember he eventually, when the DVD of Twin Peaks came out, he got the DVD. But for a while, that was how we were able to watch those shows, was that he had taped them all off of Bravo, which you just wouldn't imagine Bravo showing anything like that anymore. But that's that's what But anyway, so this is kind of one of those the effect of 1994 hadn't fully taken hold yet, and probably doesn't until 1997. So you get this period in the middle there where you still get these early 90s style actioners, and this one definitely, it feels a little bit later in some of the film effects and in some of the ways. Again, it's right in that middle period of 1995. But this movie was the #1 grossing film globally, which is interesting because it wasn't a top 10 film domestically here in the U.S. And I think they said 2014's Transformers, one of the Transformers movies was like that. It wasn't great domestically, but globally it was like the number one film of the year. And so I think that also speaks to Bruce Willis's appeal, just internationally. That, and I think it's, what eventually leads to, when his health starts to deteriorate and he's making these direct-to-video movies where Randall Emmett, as the producer, kind of capitalizes on it because there was still a huge market in Europe for him no matter what he was doing. Or globally, there was a huge market for him no matter what the movie was. And you could see it here in 1995, that even if this movie doesn't do so great in America, because we were kind of over action movies a little bit, 1994 was starting to set in for us, right? We weren't taking these things in quite to the same degree. Though I think Waterworld was globally a big movie, that was one that was like considered a huge flop, and it did well globally. So that's another one. I think it was like top 10. I think it was the number 10 movie that year, 1995, and we just think of that movie as a complete joke, right? Like what the hell is going on there? So our tastes had changed a little bit, kind of overall, right? There was still a room for some of these action movies, but things had started to kind of fall off a bit in 1995. And this movie, it's interesting how it suffers domestically for that, but not globally, and is like the number one grossing film throughout the world in 1995. I think the other thing too, when I think back to this movie coming out, I had this feeling of like, this is going to be the end of the series. This is the trilogy. This is where we end things. And I felt like the movie has a good solid end of things. I mean, it's not such an end that like you couldn't have more of these movies, but there was a sense of like, okay, we've done 3 of these, that's it. We've done enough. Die Hard's done. We went out with a huge bang. We kind of brought it full circle by bringing Hans Gruber's brother in. Jeremy Irons was playing his brother. We've done enough nods to the first movie and enough to did enough to criticize the second movie. This is it. We're set to go here. And I think it would have been. I think this would have been enough to leave it. I think we would have been done if we don't get into the 2000s and the franchise world, right? Where, like, as much as franchises were a big thing in the 90s, growing from what they were in the 80s, in the 2000s they became the only thing. And it was like, we need to find our next franchise, right? I mean, that's why, Robert Downey Jr. is doing Sherlock Holmes movies. Like, they were trying to make a Sherlock Holmes franchise. It's like, let's bring back Charlie's Angels because we need a Charlie's Angels. It was getting crazy at that point, and that's when in 07 they're like, well, let's bring back Die Hard. People like that. We'll do another one of those movies, and that's what we're going to be doing in 2 weeks. We'll be kind of getting back into those ones, but. I think for this one here, I mean, if you're going to watch all of these in one night, which I think would be an interesting triple feature, it's interesting because you'd be watching that first movie, and the other ones, I think that first movie would be enough to propel you through the 3 of them. And on their own, each of these on their own is a fun movie night movie. They all work in that capacity. They're all really good in that sense. But for me, like, none of them are the classics that the first one is. Like, watching these two again, I'm good for probably a good, another 10 years. I don't need to watch them anytime soon again. Whereas the first Die Hard, I could watch that tomorrow. You could just fire that one up. And if somebody said to me, like, hey, what are you doing? You want to watch Die Hard? Yeah. Let's throw that on. Whereas they're like, you want to Die Hard too? I just saw that the other day. You got anything else you want to watch? I think that's the difference between those movies. And and I think also the fact that they had created something so big with the first Die Hard that it caused problems with them writing this third movie because there were just too many Die Hard innas. And these were all Die Hard innas that didn't even see the light of day. They were just, they just were in development in some way, shape, or form. It just never happened. So that's an interesting legacy, I think, for a movie series. But again, we're not done yet, right? This is where it feels like it should end. This should have been a one-off episode where I just do these 3. But no, we're going to be back in 2 weeks to do these. I don't know if we call them legacy sequels, but we'll see. We'll see what happens there with them. But I guess as we're wrapping up here, my plugs, my novel, Don's House in the Mountains. Pick that one up. It's on Kindle, Kindle Unlimited. It's available in paperback. Looking to get something new out there later this year. I know we're already almost into October, but it's going to be called Nadia and Aiden, about these fraternal twins in 2008. So 1 year after this next Die Hard movie comes out. They they grew up in Paris, but their mom is originally from Philadelphia, so they come to America to learn about their American heritage. And so that's what it is. The novella, it's about 160 pages, but not many words. Like maybe 50,000, 60,000 words. And look for that probably November, December, probably probably more December, but we'll keep posted. Watch this space, and you'll find out when it's available. And I'll always appreciate if somebody wants to buy that as well. But yeah, I think that's everything here. So why don't we wrap up here? Thank you everybody for listening, and we'll be back soon. Bye everyone.
Director